Violence comes in many forms. It is not exclusively a physical act, nor can the emotional trauma and everyday fear these victims have suffered at the hands of the MRTA be easily forgotten. The following video retells the story of the Japanese embassy crisis from the perspective of the hostages themselves. As their story shows, the Movimiento Revolucionario Tupac Amaru, also known as the MRTA, clearly displayed its power through acts of violence, despite the claims that the MRTA was a non-violent guerrilla group.
My name is Ana Teresa Carrillo. On December 17, 1996, my husband Pedro Carrillo and I went to a party held by Morihisa Aoki, the Japanese ambassador to Peru. He was celebrating Emperor Akihito's 63rd birthday. I was 8.5 months pregnant. Pedro and I planned to leave early, but we ended up staying for a while. We mingled with 6 or 7 other U.S. Embassy and USAID officials there. We were in the backyard when we heard the explosion. There was smoke, gunshots, people panicking and tripping over each other, insurgents spilling in. Pedro and I ducked under a table. The insurgents were MRTA, Tupac Amaru Revolutionary Movement guerrillas. As the smoke dissipated, they announced their presence and commanded us to lie down on the ground. Looking around, I couldn't spot a single police officer or bodyguard. Somehow, we had been vulnerable, and the MRTA had exploited that. The insurgents herded us into the house and separated us into different rooms by sex. I heard gunshots coming from outside. The police were shooting at the residents in vain. That just made the MRTA guerrillas angrier. Eventually, the shots stopped, confirming for me that Pedro and I were at the mercy of the MRTA. Around midnight, they started releasing the women, with the exception of those related to government officials. Funny enough, I was standing next to the president of Peru, Alberto Fujimori's mother. She had hidden her identity and walked right past the MRTA. But regardless, I was free. There had been 500 guests at the party, and I had counted only 15 guerrillas, many of them quite young. The MRTA had slain 139 civilians between mid-1984 and 1990. While nowhere near the murder rate of the Sendero Luminoso, I'd be foolish to trust the supposedly benevolent MRTA with Pedro's life.
Named for Tupac Amaru II, an indigenous Peruvian revolutionary, the MRTA was formed in 1983 to fight against government corruption in Peru. The group sought equal rights for all citizens and policies addressing inequality. While claiming to be nonviolent, they routinely robbed and bombed establishments they thought were connected to U.S. imperialism and kidnapped high-profile targets for ransom. By 1996, the MRTA had lost a significant amount of power. Their founder, Victor Pole Campos, was arrested in 1992, leading to a power vacuum within the organization. With President Fujimori's sights set on eliminating guerrilla groups, the MRTA saw their membership decreasing and their influence weakening. The Japanese embassy crisis was meant to be the turning point for the MRTA. They planned to use the hostages to negotiate for the release of several detained comrades, Campos included, and to generate support for the movement. However, the hostage crisis demonstrated that when the MRTA failed to implement change through traditional tactics, they turned to terrorism.
My name is Pedro Carrillo. I was a project management specialist for USAID in Lima, Peru. I managed parts of the Alternative Development Project, which included encouraging Peruvian coca farmers to plant multiple, lucrative crops rather than relying on coca. I had gone to Ambassador Aoki's party to gauge Japanese interest in crop diversification programs in Peru. I remember being a little nervous. There had been threats against various embassies from both the Sendero Luminoso and MRTA. Bombings of embassies and domestic businesses were a favorite tactic of the MRTA, making up 40% of their illegal activities. However, like most people, I never thought it would happen to me. Nor did I think that the doctors occupying the residence connected to Aoki's were MRTA guerrillas in disguise, preparing explosive charges. After the women were released, they forced us to move all of the furniture out of the rooms and collect leftover food from the party. They moved downstairs and asked each of us to identify ourselves. They made a list of our ranks, jobs, nationalities, and business affiliations. I was uneasy. The MRTA had often kidnapped officials connected to the U.S. and bombed U.S.-owned properties. My management position at USAID made me a potential target. When the MRTA approached me, I gave them my information and they made no comment, moving on to the next person. Regardless, I was at their mercy.
The MRTA initiated the hostage crisis because they wanted the Peruvian government to revise Fujimori's free market-friendly reforms and sought the mass release of MRTA members from prisons. Despite economic growth and increased foreign investment, many Peruvians still lived in poverty. However, while not explicitly stated, it was apparent that the MRTA also initiated the hostage crisis to thrust themselves into the forefront of Peruvian politics. Unlike Sendero Luminoso, which put emphasis on a concrete hierarchy, the MRTA believed that the populace-inspired action was more important than group organization, which they believed would naturally resolve itself. They preferred demonstrative violence over actual violence, oftentimes giving warnings before bombings to clear civilians, and they had no qualms with using violence to gain new sympathizers and members.
Thankfully, the MRTA allowed us to pass letters to our families. I felt reassured, but still concerned. I was worried I would miss the birth of my next child. These are the letters. Hola, mi gordo. Hello, my love. I'm thinking of you and my wonderful children, Ernesto, Eduardo, and Carmela. Kisses to Juan, Julian, and Carmen. Many kisses to my brothers and a special one to Paula. Do not worry. Keep in touch. I am healthy. Many kisses. I love you. Pedro.
Hola, Pedro. Hello, Pedro. I'm calm. Do not worry. We are all fine. I'm with my parents. Ernesto and Eduardo know, and they have faith that you'll be released soon. I ask that you communicate with Mr. Huerta, who was very attentive and let me leave in the third group when he realized that I was pregnant. I sat on a chair to rest. The doctor says that you should be here by my side because I am more calm when we are together rather than apart. Anxiety can speed up the birth. I know that he will understand when he realizes that there are only a few days before my due date. Thank him on my behalf. Today is our anniversary. I have faith that you'll be released today. I know that there is a friendly communication between them. Stay calm. We love you and miss you. Signed by your kids.
Nestor Serpa, leader of the MRTA and participant in the hostage crisis, distinguished the MRTA from Sendero Luminoso, calling them terrorists while referring to themselves as guerrillas. But people who were held hostage, like Ana Teresa and Pedro Carrillo, could attest that they were violent. They would explain that violence includes creating an atmosphere of fear, controlling people with the threat of violence, and causing lifelong trauma. On April 22, 1997, Peruvian special forces stormed the residence from beneath the soccer field, rescued all the hostages, and executed the MRTA revolutionaries. Only one hostage died during the operation, having a heart attack during the firefight. The hostage crisis and the execution of the revolutionaries effectively decimated the MRTA insurgency in Peru. While they still exist today, their membership is minuscule.
I felt for the MRTA insurgency group because they wanted to do something good for the people. But when they decided to turn violent, I stopped agreeing. It was not the correct way to grab the attention of Peru. Instead, it generated fear among many Peruvians.
I agree with what my husband said. At first, we both felt for the goals of the MRTA, but the moment that they kidnapped 500 people, it seemed very extreme.
No other MRTA terrorist act has been committed since. But to this day, people like Pedro and Ana Carrillo suffer from trauma, as do their families and hundreds of other hostages as well. Despite the claims that the MRTA was a mostly non-violent guerrilla group, they committed violent acts throughout the time that they were active, and the kidnapping of 500 people was one of the most impactful on Lima's community. The Peruvian government prevented its citizens from having full civil rights. However, the violence caused by the MRTA was not avoided, evidenced through the exploration of different narratives from hostages during the Japanese embassy crisis of 1996 in Lima, Peru.
I was released on the 6th day of the hostage crisis. At around 10 a.m. that day, they called my name and I knew I would be free. Around 7 p.m. that night, those of us who were being released were taken to a military hospital, and soon after, we were dropped off around the city, close to our homes. Standing outside my home, I was breathless. I would be there for my child's birth. I would go back to work. I would continue, exactly where I left off 6 days before. As Ana Teresa opened the door and embraced me, the kids running in, crying, I realized that, for me, it was over.